Hi, everyone. I'm Vivian Crockett. I'm the Nancy and Tim Hanley Assistant Curator of Contemporary Art at the Dallas Museum of Art. Really excited to be in conversation with Jatavia Gary today. We are trying to stay on time, so I'm going to go straight into it and delve into some of the logistical front end of the series. Just wanting to make sure everyone is aware of what this kind of initiative is. So for those who are plugging in for the first time, Texas Talks Art is a multi-institutional initiative intended to both introduce the work of artists across the state of Texas to wider audiences and also to foster collaboration between local nonprofit arts organizations. So these take the form of virtual 30-minute lunchtime talks and features 50 Texas artists and artist collectives in conversation with 50 Texas curators beginning January 2021, which we're in right now, and continuing throughout the year. So the series will feature an intergenerational roster of artists working across mediums. They're all free, and they all happen at noon Central Time on Tuesdays. They're recorded and archived for those who can't join live, and more information is available at texastalksart.org. Before I introduce Jatavia, I wanted to shout out some of the supporters of the series that have made it possible. So special thanks to Deborah Dupre and Richard Rothberg, the McGinnis Family Fund of Community Foundations of Texas, Tatum Art Advisory, and thank you to our media partner, Glass Tire. So without further ado, I want to introduce the wonderful Jatavia Gary. For those who are not familiar with filmmaker currently living and working in Dallas, from Dallas originally. Gary's work seeks to liberate the distorted histories through which Black life is often viewed while fleshing out a nuanced and multivalent Black interiority. Through documentary film and experimental video art, Gary charts the way structures of power shape our perceptions around representation, race, gender, sexuality, and violence. The artist earned her MFA in social documentary filmmaking from the School of Visual Arts in New York City. Her award-winning films, An Ecstatic Experience, Giverny 1, Négresse Impériale, and the Giverny Document have screened at festivals, cinemas, and institutions worldwide. I'm going to give part of this list. It's by no means comprehensive, but these include the Edinburgh International Film Festival, the Whitney Museum, Anthology Film Archives, Atlanta Film Festival, the Schomburg Center, MoMA PS1, MoCA Los Angeles, Harvard Film Archives, New Orleans Film Festival, and many more. She has received generous support from Sundance Documentary Fund, the Jerome Foundation, Doc Society, among others. In 2016, Gary participated in the Terra Foundation Summer Residency Program in Giverny, France, which will be part of what we discuss today. She was a 2018 to 2019 Radcliffe Fellow at Harvard University, a 2019 Creative Capital Awardee, and a 2019 Field of Vision Fellow. So that's a lot to say, but I want to give you your dues and your flowers and make sure everyone is aware of your incredible work to date and the work that you continue to do. So just a quick hello and check in. How are you feeling, Jatavia?
I'm doing okay. I'm alive, so I'm grateful. How are you?
I feel similarly grateful. I've been really anxious the past week. I don't know if it's something in the air. It's been a rough one, but we're
Yeah.
on the roller coaster
Yeah.
and each day at a time. So here we are. I'm grateful to be in conversation with you. So I wanted to start off and show the trailer of the Giverny document, just for those who may not be familiar with the work, so they have somewhat of a visual reference for part of the conversation we'll have today. So if we can play that.
Feelings, come on. Whoa, 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 feelings. Whoa, 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 feelings. Again in my heart. Again. Feelings, feelings that I never met you, feelings that I never even saw you.
Hi. So I hope for those who are not familiar with the work, you got a little bit of a glimpse of Jatavia's very complex process. I can still hear the audio that's coming from the YouTube, I think. But if we could go back to the slide show. Or Jatavia, we can start talking a little bit about the different iterations of the Giverny project. You have both the Giverny document, but also the Giverny suite, which I wanted to spend some time talking through today.
Yeah. So it's actually, when we say the suite, it's actually encompasses 3 different projects, all kind of stemming from the first, which is Giverny 1, Negresso Imperial, which is like the first kind of Giverny film that I did in 2017, right after, spending the summer in Giverny in 2016. And it's basically just the garden footage of, Philando Castile and Diamond Reynolds and myself in the garden. It's just like a 6-minute experimental film that is basically kind of the kernel or the nugget with which everything else blooms from. From there, we went to the Giverny document, which is this 40-minute piece, which can live on its own, but it is also the kind of middle frame in the 3-channel film, the Giverny suite. So you have one film inside of another. You have films within a film, and they build out for kind of multi-sensory, immersive installation in the 3-channel work.
Beautiful. Yeah, I actually first saw the Giverny 1, Négresse Impériale, at the We Buy Gold presentation at Sergeant's Daughter. So it's been really incredible to see the evolution of the project, and even seeing the ways that I wish I'm not seeing the PowerPoints. I don't think the audience is. I'm trying to get that technical difficulty sorted out because I think it's really important to see the visual of how the 3-channel installation plays out.
Yeah. The 3-channel.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So we get to see a little bit of what this install looked at Paula Cooper, and just want to shout out the fact that you have these beautiful installations kind of happening simultaneously at the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles and at Paula Cooper Gallery alongside another body of work, and that sadly these kind of closed down because of the start of the pandemic. And you made the decision at one point to make your work available, the single channel version of the Giverny document, online. And that's always a kind of risk that an artist takes when doing that, because then people can kind of clone your work and circulate it however they want. But I think the way that your work is traversing different spheres, reading your bio for those who aren't familiar with you, understanding that your work is circulating through film festivals, but also is living in these kinds of art institutional spaces, and that it has these different resonances, is going to reach different audiences through these means.
Yeah, it was important for me to take the single channel to YouTube. It's great to be able to occupy these art institutions and the festivals. Hundreds of people, thousands of people are able to see them that way. But it's really important for me to have a kind of wider distribution, and that's something that we're focused on for the future, particularly as people are still very much stuck in their houses, isolating and streaming all types of stuff. So hopefully we can have the Giverny document available for folks as well this year through one of the streaming channels. But yeah, to me, it really is about the varied iterations of the work and how it takes shape from place to place. When we're screening it online versus when we're screening it in a movie theater, is completely different than stepping into a gallery and being surrounded by multiple screens. I don't know if we can flip through the other photos, but if you look closely on that center screen, it's actually now the right screen, there are about 30 frames. There's art objects that are also included in this installation. So we have this antique settee, that's kind of tilted on its axis, sitting askew, and 30 different frames that are strategically placed on the back wall there. And there's also two, we'll get to that later. You can see them better here, yeah. But there's also two very small kind of shrines or altars for these orishas, Yemaya and Oshun. Those were both in both the Hammer space, but also the New York Paula Cooper Gallery, because it was important for me to acknowledge these two entities, these two beings, because this work is very centered around womanhood and the safety of women. And these two orishas are symbolic of the maternal and feminine power of the ocean, but also of the lakes, the rivers, and the streams. So whether we're talking about Oshun or whether we're talking about Mamiwata or Yemaya, it was important for me to acknowledge them. There's also an acknowledgement of them in the actual piece, a kind of visual salute, if you will. So this work is different based on where you engage it. And for me, that's really important because it gives the work a kind of life that extends beyond one iteration. So yeah, I've been working through the themes of the Giverny document and this project since 2016. So just meditating on what does it mean to feel safe in one's body as a woman identified person, as a really connect with various members of the community, but also think through the past in the archival engagement.
I think this question of placing these altars in this kind of art institutional space speaks so much to this notion of bodily autonomy and safety that you're also talking about, because I think the work is layered so much. There's so much to kind of parse out and really unpack in your work. You're really giving so many different references simultaneously. And if you know, like some people are going to walk into the space and instantly kind of recognize these altars, understand that they're altars to Oshun, to Yemaya. And then there are others who might not understand, having to kind of negotiate as a curator sometimes in institutions where the people working in the institution have no frame of reference for this, and they're like, where are we going to source this material? And I'm like, don't worry about it. I'll go to the Botanica if I need to. I'll get the materials, but it's part of the conversation is kind of making, you're making a space that anyone can enter, but it's also your work is centering Black women and Black femmes in a very specific way. And I think you also did that recently when you had the art forum feature, you brought in other people into that space. And I think that's really important too. Because we're tight on time, I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about this kind of cinema verite moment of the film and how it plays into everything else. You're wearing, is this Pamela? Is that her name?
That's the name of the wig. Her name is Pamela.
So it's like this way that you're referencing this kind of 1960s realness, right? And referencing the Chronicle of a Summer. And in that film, the question is, are you happy, right? Mm-hmm. And are you happy amongst the backdrop of the Algerian War, of this extreme colonial violence and occupation? And then here you're asking a range of Black women, right? From the diaspora, so women who are from Sierra Leone, who are from Guyana, who are from Harlem, all different ages. Do you feel safe in your body? And what does that mean in the context of this period from, 2016, when you're first doing this residency and you're supposed to be in this idyllic, beautiful space, but then back in the United States, these horrendous murders continue to happen and you can't quite escape. You don't have the luxury of being, just only in Giverny and feeling that kind of calm. You're kind of constantly negotiating that. So I know I maybe have said too much, but if you want to talk a little bit about that process.
About the process of the cinema verite, or
like interviewing different people and like kind of why you chose to bring that into the work. And maybe I'll show this kind of image as a.
That's great. Well, I went to film school, so I learned about the various modes of documentary filmmaking and nonfiction filmmaking. And I understand that cinema verite has many iterations. There's an American form, which is very observational and fly on the wall. But then there's the French version of it, which actually is the original. And it has more experimental roots. It has more kind of a scientific inquiry. You know, it's really just about, let's go out here and experiment. And Chronicle of the Summer was the first cinema verite film, 1960, 1961. It went to Cannes. Jean Rouch and Edgar Morin. Morin is like an anthropologist, and Rouch, of course, has done all of this kind of ethnographic work all over the continent of Africa, but also in his native France. And so to me, it was really interesting to see this kind of vox populi, this voice of the people technique used, you know, so many decades ago. And this is something that we see often and within a kind of news context. But to be able to re-articulate this within a, you know, documentary film, but also kind of art film context, to me was an exciting notion. Like, what can we get at also if we shift our lens? And some people may think that we are narrowing. Like, I've read critiques that felt like, oh, this is narrowing because she's talking only to Black women. But to me, this is a broadening. Because there's so many different types of Black women. There's millions of people who are Black women speaking, you know, hundreds of languages from all different sorts of ethnic groups. So this is a very wide swatch of humanity. And so it was important for me to really focus the lens on us so that we can see the multiplicity and the kind of multivalent nature of Black womanhood in our lived experience. Sure, there's some overlap and some shared experiences, but, you know, everybody's got different points of view and personalities and responses. So to me, it was really important to center folks who were the most vulnerable in society and really think about what we have to say and how that can begin to shift consciousness and shift how we meet this moment. Oftentimes we're not centering the most vulnerable. We're having people speak on behalf, right? Or give voice to the voiceless. And I think that's unnecessary when you can just go, you know, and talk to people. So to me, it was very exciting to be able to complicate and trouble this notion of ethnography and anthropology, because I'm from this, you know, community. I lived in New York for 17 years. So it wasn't, you know, it very much felt like a kind of Zora Neale Hurston, you know, experience, you know, Zora on 125th Street, if you will. So very much in that tradition of examining and being in conversation and engagement with the community in order to elucidate some very real truths. To me, that this is the meat of the work, these interviews.
Absolutely. And then with the 3-channel, I mean, it happens with a single channel as well, but I think with the 3-channel, you end up with the different juxtapositions of the various kind of Black women figures from these different historical moments, right? So that you're watching this interview, and on the side view there, you're seeing Josephine Baker in this birdcage in Zuzu from the 1930s. And then at this other moment, we see, you know, you as Giverny with Nina Simone in 1976 at Montreux. So I think there's this really kind of beautiful interweaving. And even the space, this kind of settee at the center, in the conversation that you had with Aaron, you talk about how, you know, it has this very kind of French connotation, but it's a particular aesthetic that you see in certain homes. Like, you definitely see it in, you know, I have family members that have this kind of aesthetic in their home, and it's
right.
I think resonates with certain Black folks and that kind of decor, that kind of lineage.
Yeah. There's definitely an aesthetic overlap. You know, when I go into in my home, but also if I go into my grandmother's home or my great aunt's home, there's going to be multiple frames, you know, on the wall or sitting on a kind of tabletop or, you know, bookshelf, just, you know, kind of strategically placed or even haphazardly placed. Also, when I step into my Aunt May's house, she's 84 years old. She lives in Oak Cliff. If I go in there, there's certain spaces where you're not going to be able to sit, right? Because it's such fancy, you know, sofas, and they're all white and they have plastic covering, and the whole space feels like this kind of really intentional, very deliberately executed installation, but it's a living space, it's a domicile. And so I wanted to bring this into the gallery, right? So it's, and on one hand, pointing to the kind of French salon. On the other hand, it's pointing to Aimee and Grandmama Dunn and all of the Black women that I grew up, you know, at the feet of. So it feels like a kind of meshing or a visual Venn diagram, so to speak.
And I wish we could spend more time with this work. I want to be mindful of the time we have together. And I would recommend for those who haven't seen, there's a more extended conversation between Jatavia and Aaron Cristobal when they screened. Shout out Aaron, big love. When they screened Giovanni document back in April. So that will give you a really kind of in-depth look at this work, which I wish we had time to do today. But I wanted to talk about this other piece that was part of Flesh That Needs to Be Loved, this kind of beautiful Toni Morrison evocation from Beloved. And here we have Precious Memories, which I think transitions us nicely into the work that you've been doing now. And it feels like this project is coming out of some of the reflections you've been doing related to the evidence of things not seen. Could you talk a little bit about this kind of tableau that you've have here?
Yeah, so this is a kind of sketch or a gesture towards my childhood living room. It's not the full living room, of course, and it's kind of almost like a kind of funhouse version of the living room or a distorted version of the living space. But we definitely had a recliner like that growing up in the early 90s. Definitely had a side table and a lamp. And that photograph is actually my mother. But this tower of monitors is very much a distortion, and it takes us into this kind of surrealist space, this kind of dream space. And this work, to me, Precious Memories, is all about the kind of narrativizing and mythologizing that we do on the past. And this, I wish this were just an American problem. You know, I wish this was just maybe, you know, sometimes my family's problem, but I feel like it's a kind of universal problem, and I hate to invoke universality because we don't want to water anything down. But to me, this was about really kind of whitewashing or distorting our notions of what the past is based on our traumatic events, right? You know how the mind and the brain sometimes hides things from you or blocks things from you, or memory, how memory is a kind of a narrator that you can't necessarily trust sometimes, if that makes sense. So it's really just about like this kind of nostalgia, right? This impulse to make the past sweet when in actuality it was bloody. So at the top frame, we have this really fantastic performance from Louis Armstrong, but it's also really troubling because it's filled with a bunch of kind of like antebellum tropes, so you've got a kind of shucking and jiving figure, you've got a literal mammy, and you've got Black people lazing about. He's performing a song called When It's Sleepy Time Down South. So it's all about the nostalgia of the South, right? When we know, right, that the South and the period of enslavement was one of extreme brutality and violence. We understand that, that violence even extends now towards today. What Hartman calls the afterlife of slavery, right? We understand that those threats are still very much present and real. But this was a dramatization of, someone's skewed idea of the South. And so we have the genius and virtuoso of Louis Armstrong, but juxtaposed against this kind of Hollywood lie. And so what I've done is gone over and manipulated this footage. I've scratched and etched all over it. I've, splashed red paint to kind of invoke the blood of that period and of our nation's like history and tradition. And in the middle, we have family archival from a funeral. And at the bottom, we have a very, very distorted adult film. So we're thinking through notions of violence. We're thinking through notions of death and abuse, but also, again, the kind of rose-tinted lens that we put on this. In the plexiglass acrylic wedges is live material. So we've got actual cotton bowls. We've got dried fern. You can see it in the detail. And at the very bottom, we've got a dried flower called a helichrysum. So this is a medicinal flower that invokes healing. And so I really wanted to, of course, always think about healing modalities and care have leaned on, right, to make sure that we survive the very real, threats on our lives that persist today. So this film is about like the intimate violence of family, but also the intimate violence of nationhood, right? The South is very interesting in that there's an intimacy to the violence. You could live in a neighborhood over from someone who wants to kill you, right? Or you could be distantly related to them, as cousins, and they have a different reality than you based on race, based on class, etc. So this is about the intimacy of violence and how we lie to ourselves or narrativize it, right? And then next to that is a really fantastic quote from the remarkable scholar, Saidiya Hartman, a Black feminist scholar. And this quote emerged from a talk. She was actually lauding another scholar, Christina Sharp, right? And so Hartman and Sharp are on a panel with a bunch of other folks, including Arthur Jafa. And she's talking about the archival engagement that Sharp is so committed to. In fact, they're both committed to a really rigorous archival engagement. And she talks about care as being the antidote to violence. And I remember being absolutely gobsmacked when she said this. And this is something that I come back to every day in reminding myself on how to survive, basically, especially during moments like this, and how care is actually a commitment, right? It's labor intensive, but it's something that if we commit to, we can ensure our longevity, and we can ensure resilience in the face of, a space that is trying to kill us. So it is important for me to really think through the intellectual labor and the intellectual contributions of Black feminist scholars like Hartman, like Sharp, like Bell Hooks, and even like the emerging ones, like someone like Ayana Dozier, or someone like Zoe Samudzi, or Badur Allegra. There's a number of younger women who are also coming up, who are doing rigorous scholarship around what does it mean to be Black and survive. What does it mean to be Black and be met with all manner of unremitting violence, but still assert personhood, subjecthood, or even trouble the notions of subjecthood and the human.
I love this idea of citational ethics too, because the idea that we're building off of each other, we're growing with each other, and there's a kind of conversation going among these different Black women, which I think your work does. It puts different Black women in dialogue together and the kind of cultural producers, but it's also something that you shout out, you give the flowers, you acknowledge that kind of previous presence of someone like the influence of someone like Saidiya Hartman to your work. I feel like this might be a good moment to transition to talking a little bit about the evidence of things not seen, which I see as a project that's all about the kind of care as an antidote to transgenerational trauma, the histories of that kind of pain and the healing, the kind of vulnerability that you're showing in this project, this kind of intimate autobiographical look into the self. So if you want to, you can speak a little bit about the project first, or we can show the clip first.
I'll just say, I'll speak very quickly about it because I think it's important to show it. I've been interviewing my mom since, 2011, 2012. So to me, the autobiographical impulse was innate. It was important for me to really use this artwork and these creative skill sets that I was being taught in school to examine myself and examine my family. So the evidence of things not seen has been a project that I've been engaged in for several years now, even before the things that we've just seen now. So it was important for me to come back home and to situate myself in community with my family so that we can finish the project, but also work towards a kind of continued healing and evolution. So this is a work sample that we're going to see from the film. We're actually in post-production now, editing the work. But yeah, this is a work sample of kind of how it will look. This is not in any way exhaustive, but it gives an idea of what we are going for. So this is my mother.
I do believe that they loved each other. It's just that they didn't know how to communicate effectively. They wanted to be together, but at the same time, they wanted to do their own thing. And it didn't work. And my parents was hardworking parents, but they were young and they made young decisions. For example, my father would get paid sometime and he wouldn't come straight home. It's funny now that I look back on it, but it wasn't funny back then when I was a kid. And then when he didn't know how to come home, my mom knew how to go find him. They would fight, they would drink and party like most young people in their mid-20s. A lot of times under the influence, they didn't make good decisions, so it kept strife in the home.
How was that for you?
I was terrified. I would wake up on Fridays with a migraine headache. And my older brother would come and get me and keep me for the weekend until Sunday. If my dad didn't come home, then it would pretty much be hell to pay. She already started drinking, Friday by the time she got off and cashed her check. My mom was notorious for making sure that things in the home was taken care of, bills was paid. But if my father would come up short, then she had to deal with, okay, how we gonna make the ends meet?
So your father would go out and blow the money?
He likes to party, he likes to buy everybody everything. He go get his haircut, everybody that hanging out with him get a haircut. If he goes down to Miss Tavis, which was like a little honky-tonk down in the country, he buys something to drink, everybody, what y'all want? She was talking to one of her girlfriends and she found out that he was down to Miss Tavis. Miss Tavis' home had like a little club, a little gambling shack that was built onto her house. She walked up on the porch of this place and kicked the door in. My mom worked at a processing plant. She could cut up chicken, a whole chicken within about 5 minutes with her eyes closed. Well, the tool that she used was a knife. It's called the Chicago cutter. She kept it in her bra. And whenever she needed it, she had it. She walked down the middle of Harvey Street. She kicked the door in and cut them up out of that house. He was sitting up in there at the gambling table with the wig on, no shirt on.
Whose wig?
Miss Tavis. My mom just cut him on up out of there like a paper doll. He came on to the house with the rest of that little chick, and it was on for the rest of the weekend.
So they would fight?
The whole weekend. I could not live like that. I would never put up with nothing like that.
Such an incredible clip. I love they made young decisions. I think the way your mom words this clip is absolutely incredible. And, we got a little bit of this from the trailer that we showed earlier. But I would love to kind of get into a little bit more of something that I think is characteristic of your work that I think is really a strong element of your work, which is the direct animation element, the way that you literally manually manipulate the film celluloid and all the different kinds of procedures that you use and the kind of hours of labor that produces kind of tactility. This kind of, you can almost feel the film as you're watching it. There's this kind of haptic quality to your work that I think is something that, in following your career since first seeing an ecstatic experience to now, is something that I think really defines your work, and I think plays out really beautifully in this clip.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really important for me to make sure that I continue to have a kind of hands-on technique. I know that I'm a filmmaker and I'm a part of the digital age, and this is, but it's still very important for me to have a kind of labor-intensive, hand-drawn, almost artisanal and craft element to my practice. And I think that this extra bit, right, this commitment to that makes such a strong difference in A, my process, but B, the experience of the viewer. Like you said, it in many ways invokes a kind of visceral, lived in, embodied experience as you are watching it. And I think that's something that is lost if we only focus on the digital modalities or the digital methods of creating. But when you bring in a kind of hand processing, and so this is taking, if we're talking about a frame by frame animation, like what we see in Ecstatic Experience, this is taking months, right? If we are doing something more graphical and abstract, it's taking a little less time, but there's still this, again, this element of care and this element of commitment and intimacy that comes with exploring the materials, right? So whether that be the celluloid itself and marking out elements of marking out pieces of the emulsion, or bleaching or masking off pieces of the emulsion, which is on the surface of the actual film, or whether we're talking about painting on the surface of the film, what we're getting is a very kind of real vibration, a kind of kinetic energy that is coming off of the screen as you watch it. And that just can't be replicated. You can create this sort of dynamic animation via software. But for me, it's really important to hang on to this because it gives me time to think, to process, and to feel. It's taking so long, right? This 2-minute clip in an Ecstatic Experience, which we haven't seen here, but you can find it online, the Ruby D clip, that took me, maybe 2 months to do 2 minutes. So that sort of real commitment and engagement with the materials, I don't think that's something that I would trade in because of what I'm hearing from the viewer and because of what I get in terms of the peaceful Zen-like quality of this repetitious, meticulous, labor-intensive mark-making practice. So I'm grateful for it. Shout out to Lynn Lai and Stan Brackage. A lot of this was, really innovated in, the 1950s, 1940s by these experimental and avant-garde filmmakers. And what I've just done is kind of reached back and brought elements into my own practice and juxtaposed it in the edit to, contemporary archival footage that I've shot, but also historical archival.
Well, with the brackage, I think it's so much the formal. And I think that's also something that I want to problematize, this idea that when white dudes do it, it's just formal and there's no interiority there. Like there's a person there, like he's making specific decisions. But I think the fact that it's so tied to your praxis in particular, and I especially tied to this project, the way that you're weaving this particular footage, as she's talking about the Chicago cutter, and then we're seeing this archival footage, like it's doing something very particular there.
Yeah, I'm definitely not committed to just formalism. That's not something, I'm glad you're troubling that. We can also talk about appropriation with how Lin Lai uses, the music and the music from West African ethnic groups, but also like the marks and the designs of the Maori people. So there is something that changes in the hands of a Black woman filmmaker, right? We begin to extend the techniques beyond formalism to an actual, again, subjectivity. What are we talking about? What are you thinking as the maker? What is your hand saying? So it's not simply just important to show the hand, but what is the hand? What is the POV of the hand? What is the point of view of the hand? And so I'm situating myself very much within the work and within the tradition, and very much with something to say, right? So we're grateful for their innovations, but we're also interested in pushing it forward.
And I wanted to talk a little bit about the decision to come back to Dallas for the final stage and the post-production part of the project after 17 years in Brooklyn. It's a pretty, it's a coming home of sorts, but I think probably an estranged form of coming home. Yeah. We can speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's giving very much prodigal daughter, but also like in suspended animation because I can't really go see anybody I can't really be around people. I go see my mama like every 2 weeks, every once in a while, you know. We talk on the phone, and very rarely I'll go see my great aunt. But there's so many cousins, there's other aunts, there's other uncles, grandparents. My granddaddy is in San Antonio. I haven't seen him since 2019 when we filmed together. So it's in many ways very bittersweet. But it's also, you know, one thing I've learned, this project has taught me patience because we've been working on it for so long, since like 2013, 2014, off and on, and got really serious about it in 2015. And I knew the documentaries took a long time, but when you're making a personal documentary, it's very protracted. And for me, it was about really leaning into this notion of divine timing. And so I'm okay with where I am now. You know, it's not the best. I would definitely love to be interviewing, you know, all of the elders in my life and scanning photo albums and, you know, digitizing VHS tapes. I've got like tons of VHS tapes of archival footage, but also tons of like super 8mm footage from my great aunt May, again, who, you know, was on her Zora Neale Hurston shit in the 1960s with her camera, you know, filming both sides of the family. So, I mean, there is work to be done here in my studio. And hopefully, God willing, you know, when we move past this period, we can continue to delve deeper into this kind of excavation, right? A very real personal excavation of our history as a family, but also as a people. And also as, you know, it's a larger story about not simply the South, but the nation, right? And again, the lies that we kind of tell ourselves in order to survive. But how can we reach this level of healing? How can we begin to really think about examining the past in an effort to rewrite a more equitable and a more just future for ourselves, for our children? And that's really what this notion of, like, you know, thinking through intergenerational trauma is about for me. It's not simply about like stirring the pot or like making people upset or uncomfortable, but, you know, understanding that things can't be changed until they are faced. So these conversations I'm having with my family members are really about courage, you know, and how can we really face each other and face the truth of who we are.
Well, I've liked that you've used a different wording, like you're using intergenerational now, but I've heard you reference it as transgenerational, which is also something slightly different than intergenerational, in the sense that you're kind of acknowledging the way that that is also morphing with you, and then also, you know, that's reverberating back to the older generations based on how you then interact with maybe your mom or your other elders in your family, because of the kind of the ways that kind of the temporal play of that, the way that that trauma is kind of being transmitted, but then is circling back and is taking different forms, but also that healing, right? That it's not one or the other, that they're both kind of happening simultaneously.
Right. And non-linear, right?
Definitely non-linear. Yeah. Well, we definitely cheated time a little bit. We've gone a little over. I appreciate you taking a little extra time. It always takes a bit to get started and all the technical things to consider. I'm going to do one final shout out around questions. I'm having questions sent to me if there are any, but it seems like people are shy today. I'll just give it a couple more minutes to see if anything comes in. Giving it its moment of silence. JC, do we have anything else? I see some typing, some dots. Nothing. All right. Well, maybe we covered a lot of ground. We said the things that needed to be said for this particular iteration, but I'm really excited to see how this project continues to develop and you know, finalize during this post-production phase. I'm excited to see this work shown in Dallas, in the context of Dallas. I think that will be really crucial and important to see the work here. I think will resonate very much with audiences here. Yeah, is there anything else you want to say? Any parting words?
I just want to say thank you all, those of you who joined us online, and thank you, Vivian, and to the folks at the DMA. I appreciate the warm welcome. So I hope y'all stay safe.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to connecting when we can be in each other's company. But I'll see you soon from a safe distance.
Yes. All right.
All
Thank you
right.
so much.
Thank you. I hope everyone takes care and have a good day, everyone.